All right, hey, welcome to the monthly NetMRI Technical Overview. I'm going to make sure that you guys can hear me. Let me ping somebody out there. I muted you all when you entered the meeting, but you can unmute yourself. But just want to confirm you guys can hear me before I continue. Give me a sec. Okay, yeah. Okay, good. We're good to go. All right. Yeah, sorry if we had a little technical problem a second ago. I was kicked off. I think the presenters were kicked off the Zoom, but the participants weren't or something. Anyway, hopefully everybody is on, that that everybody's here that wants to be here. All right. So this is a monthly webinar that I do. I change the topic from time to time. The audience is generally prospects for network automation, NetMRI, current customers that want to expand on their use cases. We have Infoblox internal folks on for their own enablement. We record these, so if I do move a little quickly, just recall that that it is recorded. You'll get a recording afterwards, so no worries there. Today's webinar is going to focus on Futureproof. A network automation that's future-proof with policy enforcement. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what came out recently and what makes this product future-proof. So I'm going to go a little bit longer in the presentation than I normally do, maybe 25 minutes or so, and then we'll get to the demo. I'm going to discuss really quickly some business drivers. Then I'm going to do a technical overview of all the general capabilities. I'm going to talk about some new stuff that came out. I'm going to talk about what differentiates a product like this over some of the other network change and configuration management products on the market, some of which have been out there for quite a while, haven't had too much investment lately. I'm going to do the demo. For your Q&A, what I encourage you to use is the chat pod. You can use it throughout the whole webinar. I have someone on the line that's going to answer as best he can. But if he doesn't answer, or if I don't answer, then we're going to fill them out. We'll fill out the answers, and that'll be included in the email you get also. So don't worry if your question doesn't get answered right away. You'll get an email later, right? And we're going to be right at time today, so we're not going to have much time to open the lines at the end, but I'll try to do that and linger if we can. But I encourage you to use that chat pod. And again, if we don't answer it, you'll get it in the email. If you feel like I moved a little bit too quickly through the recording, you're going to get the recording as an email also. Okay. A couple of things I wanted to point out, just resource reminders. We do have a technical advisory board for this product. We meet every quarter. We've got 20 or so of some heavy using customers, along with internal Infoblox folks. You can go to the community site and apply to join. We cover roadmap. We do best practices. We talk about trends in the industry. The whole goal is for customers to meet with product management for the end result to be to continually to improve the product. We'll also do some light tutorials. For instance, we did one on the custom report builder. The next call here is going to be at the end of the month. I haven't scheduled it yet, but if you are a tab member, you'll be getting that invitation soon. We're going to cover the XML Rule Builder on that. Just letting you know that that's a resource available to you if you're a customer or you're thinking about becoming one. I also want to encourage you to use the community forum. You can use it to ask questions, post scripts, post rules. We have some information on there in our BloxFest forum that has best practices in discovery. There's a 1-hour CCS scripting tutorial, just encouraging you to use the community site. All right, this is my one slide on just business drivers on generally, if you're a director or VP or something, you say, hey, why would I look at this? It would typically to solve one of the following initiatives. Compliance is a key one. A lot of folks have compliance initiatives right now. We're talking about enforcing and auditing configuration standards on your network devices. These could be internal standards you have yourself. It could be security standards, operational standards. It could even be a regulatory standard if you have to show reports to auditors for DISA, STIG, for NSA, for PCI, for HIPAA, that sort of thing. A product like this can help you with an initiative like that. If you're trying to get more automations on service deployment, like automating provisioning new devices, bare metal, provisioning new services where a service has to be coordinated across several network devices, performing mass change, like you need to push out a password update or a S&P community name change out to hundreds or thousands of devices very quickly. product like this can help you with an initiative like that. Improving service availability, that's always obviously job one for network ops. A product like this is great for that because we are collecting all of the configuration changes. Making changes to the network is still the leading cause of problems to the network. So we have a record of all the changes. You can see who made them, when they were made. You can do side-by-side comparisons, which is key for uptime, obviously. We're also collecting performance information. We're collecting a little bit of up-down. You're getting full visibility. You're getting inventory, and the purest view you have of the network obviously allows you to make sure that it's up and running. So that's an initiative that would lead to a purchase of a product like this. And then obviously just reducing cost, right? If you're probably doing some or all of these things, and if you're using manual methods, you can reduce cost by freeing up those specialists to work on more strategic things, right? There's a lot of ROI analysis that we do on commonly users that before they implement NetMRI, they were doing this set of operations and it was taking this long. Now that they have NetMRI, it's only taking this long. And then you can do the math on how quickly you'll get a return on your investment in the product. All right. I'm going to walk through some of the features just to get a level set of what this product does. It is generally a superset of what you typically see in the network change configuration management product, NCCM, sometimes called network automation. But it does have a full-blown auto discovery, which not all NCCM tools do. It's built right in. It's not a side product. It's not something you have to special order. This is the main reason Infoblox acquired NetCordia, was for this discovery engine. So it discovers with the starting point of just giving it a range, giving it a seed router, and off it goes, right? It discovers, it figures out what it is, and then it uses the appropriate device driver to continue to communicate with that device. So it is discovering network devices and the attached end hosts. So once it sees something in an ARP MAC table on a switch, then it knows it's there. Then it even, depending on how you have it configured, goes and does a discovery and tries to see what that thing is. So it's identifying those attached workstations, laptops, servers, what they are, what operating system they're running, that sort of thing. There's extensive multi-vendor support. We have support for 67 vendors right now. We're adding new support all the time. I'll talk about that in the next slide. We do understand the topology, both layer 2 and layer 3. Our topology drawings are drawn in layer 2, but we understand the layer 3 also. There's a variety of tools for troubleshooting we include in that so that you can step out, L2 hops, how many hops from a particular node, L3 hops. You can do path analysis, what's the most likely path that's going to be taken between two end hosts, that sort of thing. We're doing a big refresh on that topology viewer also in the next coming release, which we're pretty excited about. We understand obviously the traditional network. We also understand VRF, and we can have your virtual networks organized by instances of VRF put into their own network views. So if you have overlapping IP addresses split out in virtual networks, you can all run as a single system. So full-blown auto discovery is in this product. I mentioned a second ago our device support. Obviously, the more support we have of our customer networks, the more valuable the product is. Our goal is to have 100% coverage of your networks, regardless of your vendor, even regardless of whether you're using wired, wireless, software-defined networking, which I'll get to in a second. But we have a team of engineers that are working on that only build device drivers. And customer support has a process in place that gathers the data they need and helps you test this out. And we have a queue that we're working off of all the time to add support for new devices or to adjust support to existing devices if there's been slight changes when an operating system changes or something like that. But in the last 2 calendar years, we've added support for 287 models to bring the total count to 67 vendors. We've never really done a count up of all the models. I'm sure it's in the thousands, but device support is really important to us. And so that's a key thing to look at if you're looking at other NCCM tools, is that velocity of how quickly they can add devices and what their current coverage is. So most of people, when they think of Infoblox, they think of DNS, DHCP, and IP address management. This product has an out-of-the-box synchronization with that product. We call it authoritative IPAM. So what that means is if NetMRI is discovering a new subnet, it discovers an IP address, it sends it up to IPAM to make sure that the IPAM system is accurate. So if IPAM thinks that an IP address is in use, it's being verified. If NetMRI discovers an IP address that IPAM didn't realize was being used, and that gets flagged as an unmanaged address. So you can take action on that, whether you want to remove it from the network or whether you want to make it into a managed object if it's legitimate. We're also adding a lot of context to that. We're giving IPAM the association of, for instance, which switch port, which wireless access point this end host is attached to, and then all of the other information like the operating system, the model, even who's using it with a connection out to Active Directory. So authoritative IPAM is ensuring your IPAM is accurate because it's actually connected to the network, and adding additional context. If you don't have that, then your IPAM system is really only as accurate as the data that your admins have typed into it, right? Which isn't necessarily always 100%. Okay. This product has switch port management feature built in. Some people call this end user management. Not all network change config management systems have this. So we are modeling the switches. We are modeling all the interfaces. We know the states of all the interfaces. There's an interface object, and we have this states, whether admin is up, down, whether it's operational right now, opera up, down, when it was last used, when it was first used, the duplex settings, the speed settings, we have all that. So that enables you to do your switch port capacity planning. You can, 1 second, I'm gonna mute you guys. Mute all, right? Okay, good. So the switch port capacity planning, what that means is that now, is you can track free, available, unused. You can run reports to say, hey, show me all the ports that haven't been used in 30 days but are admin up so that I can shut them down. It gives you more security. You can even run a script that will say, hey, for all the ports that haven't been used in 30 days, go ahead and shut them down. And it's not just the switch ports, it's also the attached endpoints. So you can search by an end host MAC address or an IP address, and we'll tell you which switch port it's attached to. And we're keeping that as a historical over time. So you can see, oh, this MAC was on this switch port at this point in time, but it was on this access point at this point in time. And then because we do have control over those switch ports, you can do provisioning or remediation of the switch ports. So if security comes to the network ops team and says, this IP address is not behaving on the network, where is it? Would you quarantine it? Would you disable it? Would you get it off the network? It becomes an easy job. You can search for the MAC, the IP, and then you can move it to a quarantine VLAN, or you can just straight up disable the switch port. So you do have control over just a right click right on the switch port. You can say, set this VLAN. Here's the description, do admin up, down, that sort of thing. All those switch port management capabilities, we do have built into a mobile app, because we realize that many times when you're just doing switch port configuration or troubleshooting, you're out in the field, you're in a wiring closet, you're on the data center floor, maybe you're just hooking up a printer, wireless phone, VoIP phones or something like that. That will run on iPhone, iPad, and Android, so your technician doesn't have to drag his laptop around with him. Change management, your classic NCCM. Many and most NCCM tools would not be able to call themselves that unless they did detection and collection of change. But we are doing that. We do detect when a change occurs. We can detect it immediately. We'll pick it up from the syslog message. Or if we just notice on our regular polling cycle, we go around and generally poll every device about every hour. If we see that it's changed, then we'll back up the config. If it has changed, and we'll check that first, and then we'll archive off the old one and keep the new one. We keep that history for a very long time. You can compare any two configurations side by side, and then you can search across current historical configurations, both running and startup. You can kind of see a little bit of what that looks like in the lower left, but I'll show you that during the demo. Basically, what that's showing you is that the current config has an extra line in it. SNMP server community NIC RO was added to that network device. We also have change automation, so you can use the product to push changes out. We have a job engine. We can push a wide or run a wide variety of things. We can push a template, which is almost like a text file filled with configuration lines. Very common. If you've ever used Cisco Works, you'd understand that. We also have several scripting languages that can be used. We have our own CCS scripting language, which is very powerful but very easy to use. So you can do if-thens, you can do a show, and depending on what's coming back, you can then execute some commands. You can run Perl scripts. We just announced support for Python. So both Perl and Python can be run out of our sandbox, which runs right along, it runs in the appliance. It's a separate secure container on the appliance. And there's also a client API that you can download if you want to run Perl or Python scripts from your remote workstation. And that client wrapper API will then convert the commands into the REST API messages that NetMRI is expecting. It's a very comprehensive REST API. Use it to gather data, run jobs, make changes to database objects, that sort of thing. And those jobs can be scheduled. They can be triggered. So, we trigger on all kinds of different issues that you can control, create your own issues, and any of those issues can cause a job to run if you want to do an auto remediation or a correction. The policy and compliance management, when I was referring to that initiative, this is for checking standards on your network devices. You basically can write rules. We have 3 different rule editors. I'll show you that during the demo. The rules can be organized into policies. The policies are assigned to device groups. And when we detect a change in a device in a device group, we'll check to see if it's violating any of these rules. And if it is, we'll raise an issue. That can also cause notifications to happen, SNMP traps, syslog, email, or you can run a job. We provide a lot of out-of-the-box content for the rules, right? There's DISA, there's NSA, there's some PCI rules. You can use those as is. You can edit them, just use them as an example. I'll talk a little bit in a second about some subscription services that you can use with rules also. But this is a great feature for auditing and enforcing configuration rules on your network devices. You can also write rules on the SNMP attributes that we're gathering as well. Speaking of which, this is the Futureproof your policy enforcement. We have an add-on module to NetMRI that's called the Advisor. What the Advisor does is a couple of things, but it's a live connector out to your device vendor. So it has a connector out to Cisco, it's a connector out to Juniper, to Infoblox. It has a whole roadmap of other devices that are coming down the pike. F5 is right around the corner. There's another half a dozen or so coming out in the next few months. And it's monitoring for vulnerability announcements that those vendors have made, as well as life cycle announcements like end of life, end of sale, end of support. And it uses all the data that NetMRI has, that it has discovered, and it also uses the rule engine. It generates rules itself to check to see if you are affected by these vulnerabilities and to give you the status of your life cycle. So Cisco generates a PCERT, you get an email right away telling you from NetMRI or the Advisor telling you whether you're in violation or whether you're subject to that vulnerability. So that's taking away all the time you would spend doing the manual checks or waiting for the PCERT to come in and then manually going through your database to see what the state of it is, assuming you had it. The life cycle is right in the device viewer. You can see this in the lower right. So that's just a list of devices. You can run that as a report or in the viewer, and it's telling you the end of life status. It's telling you the date it's going into support. It's telling you the date it's going end of life, and you're seeing that right for every network device. So you can filter, search, run reports on that. To really make it easier for you to do that planning. We also have another service for DISA STIG. If you need to follow DISA STIGs frequently, if you're in the government, particularly the U.S. government, or if you're connected to anything in the U.S. government like Medicare, Medicaid, a lot of insurance companies need to do this. That's a particular policy that we provide the rules for a subscription service. So DISA updates these every quarter, and we take a look at what's changed. We build the rules, and we provide them to the customers that have purchased a subscription. We are considering some other regulatory standards in the future, something like a PCI or HIPAA, although they're very similar. But right now, it's just the DISA STIG. But that is completely separate today from the advisor. So the advisor, P-certs and lifecycle, and then we also have the DISA STIG rules. There's reporting built right into this product. There's a ton of out-of-the-box reports, asset inventory, change in config, compliance, health, switch port management. You can also build your own reports. You have full access to the API when you do that. This product was initially invented by Terry Slattery. Terry Slattery was the first CCIE who wasn't a Cisco employee. He had his network consulting business. He found it easier to build a tool to detect configuration, to do configuration analysis of his client networks. And that's how NetMRI was born. It's basically checking the health of the network, like a NetMRI machine checks your health. This is a NetMRI for, this is MRI for the network. So what this means to you is that we have hundreds of out-of-the-box checks that once you just hook up the system, it's going to begin collecting and reporting on issues without, if you have any, without you having to build any of the rules yourself. So it'll check things like running doesn't match startup, like HSRP mismatch, or misconfigurations like trunk mismatch ports, that sort of thing. Fans down, power supplies down, nodes down. All these things can be reported, and then it ends up giving you an overall score of your network, and you're shooting for a 10, right? You can also ignore some of these issues if you don't think they apply. And you can also create your own issues and affect that scoring yourself. You have control over that, right? And not a lot of NCCM tools have that capability. Okay, a couple of new things I usually don't go into, but I did want to talk about this because we're really investing in this product quite a bit to keep it future-proof. If you're going to choose a change configure network automation product these days, it's rule one that an analyst will tell you, and what I would recommend is to make sure that it's future-proof, which is very difficult nowadays, particularly with the disruptions of things like virtual networks, software-defined networking, that sort of thing. Plus, there's a lot of legacy NCCM tools out there that have been around since the mid-2000s that have not been keeping up. So if you have a tool like that, it might be time to take a look at a new one. Because frankly, we are replacing a lot of those legacy NCCM tools right now with this one. But in the most recent release, 7.2, we did add support for Cisco ACI discovery. This is our movement into the SDN realm. So now we're not just doing discovery and automation of using SNMP CLI. We are using REST API. We're interacting with that API controller with REST, and we're pulling all that data in, right? So many customers are struggling as they're moving from a traditional network environment, which you're seeing in the upper right, getting off that legacy platform, and then moving where they're implementing software-defined networking. For example, you drop a Cisco ACI with a Nexus 9K into your data center, and all of a sudden your management tools have a black hole because they don't see that anymore, right? So we're staying nimble to those things by being able to do that discovery. We're also adding overlay objects to our database. So now you're going to see things in the NetMRI system like tenant, like bridge domain, like EPG, right? We're now understanding the overlay network in addition to the underlay, all right? The other thing that was nice movement in this release is our support for wireless, right? Again, I said we want to have 100% coverage of your network. We need to be able to tell you where a user is all the time. Sometimes they may be attached to a wired network. They're on a docking station, for instance. Sometimes they may be on the wireless, right? And so we are doing that tracking for that as well. So we're discovering the wireless environment. Currently, it's Cisco and Aruba. We do have elements of the other ones, but for the end host to wireless access point, those are the two that we're focusing on. And then some other things to point out. These are some other things that came in 7.2. But we do have an integration. If you have the NIOS DDI platform with Cisco ICE or PX Grid, and if you have NetMRI, everything that NetMRI is discovering that's IP and subnet related is published out to the PX grid, right, to add to that ecosystem. PX grid has some other nice things in it too, in that it's pulling in user information into DDI, and it can also fire an event out to it if you need to quarantine an end host that's infected that maybe Infoblox discovered using its DNS firewall. And then the other thing I want to point out here, I already talked about it a bit, is our support for Python, right? You can run the Python jobs right out of NetMRI, and you can really do a lot of nice things there. You're going to see these get productized over time, but there's already in our community users that are writing scripts that are, interacting with other types of SDN controllers, to cloud elements, maybe even calling into our API using Python for Ansible runs, that sort of thing. So I want to make sure you saw that. So with this Futureproof, we have differentiators that we keep against all of our competitors, but these are some really high level ones that really, I think, differentiate the product over everybody else in the industry. So I thought I'd throw this in. If you are using another NCCM tool, something to think about, or if you're thinking about buying one, you're going to compare us, these are some things to think about. But obviously that multi-vendor feed out to the device vendors for a network automation tool is a differentiator. And the fact that we're adding new vendors all the time, so you're getting your life cycle and your vulnerabilities right in our UI and notifications when it happens, is a key capability. The fact that we are pivoting and adding, keeping up to date with software-defined networking support is key in an NCCM tool, right? If your NCCM tool is going to stay on CLI, SNMP, it's slowly going to fade away as you move to software-defined networking. The fact that we're expanding out to wireless and that we understand the end hosts and which access points they're attached to, which not all NCCM tools will do. We have user management here all the way to the wireless. This fourth one is, you look at your NCCM, they all do change detection, they do change automation, they maybe do some policy compliance, although maybe not so well. But then when you look at that, we have the discovery, the switch port management, and the configuration analysis all bundled up in a single product, not additional modules. That's kind of nice. We have the integration with our market-leading Infoblox DDI solution. Right? That's over 50% of the market. This product syncs with it. You know that tool is always accurate. And then our device support coverage is key, right? I mean, a tool like this only gets you so far if it's not managing all of your network. And our goal is to get 100% coverage. So we're adding newer device models faster than other folks, and our device support list is pretty vast as it is. So just one last slide before I get into the demo. I'm going a little over. This is just keeping it generic. This is a large digital industrial company that does $124 billion in revenue in 2016. They just did a big replacement of a legacy NCCM vendor that they'd had in for a while with NetMRI to manage 45,000 network devices. That's just the network devices, not the end host. They were a big user of Infoblox DDI. So one of the win factors, one reason they brought it in was for that authoritative IPAM. They now are deploying NetMRI everywhere globally in their network and feeding IPAM. So now they know their IPAM is accurate. They also picked it up for automation. Their first project was to update the local passwords on those 45,000 network devices. That was the first project they were going to use the tool for. And then frankly, that legacy NCCM tool, they were paying a lot of maintenance for that. So they realized once they pulled that maintenance out, they'd have to pay it. That was going to end up paying for, a big chunk of what they were going to pay for NetMRI. All right, just give me a little background on that. So let's take a look at the product. All right, I'm going to focus on a couple of particular areas more than I usually do. So a couple of things I wanted to point out. So first, we do have full-blown discovery. I'm not going to linger in this screen as long as I typically do. But when you set it up, right, you don't have to import the devices. You can just simply come in here and configure ranges. So there's a way when you're doing this to set up a CIDR block, a range, a pattern, right? You can say whether you're going to include or exclude that range. You can even set up, this is where you set up seed routers, device hints to help us identify what a device is. If, for instance, like a wireless controller is always at .15 or something like that. Static IPs will force devices into the database very quickly. And you can set up blackout periods if you don't want us to discover certain during certain periods of time. Or if the blackout period is just for discovery and you don't want us to make any changes, right? There's two types of blackouts. You figure both of those. By default, our discovery is very comprehensive. It must use SNMP and CLI and a little bit of traceroute. But you do have the option of applying or overlaying other discovery services that give you even more data. You can turn on Nmap, and then we'll tell you all the TCP/IP ports that are open on all network devices and end hosts. We'll use that fingerprinting. We'll use Nmap to help us fingerprint what the device or end host is. You can turn on NetBIOS scanning for extra information on Windows endpoints. You can ping sweep. You can do a raw ping sweep, or we have something that's called a smart ping sweep, where we're only going to do it if we don't find a router in a particular subnet, right? And we do take some smart uses of CLI instead of SNMP if it's a little bit more, less easier on the network device if we gather an ARP table using CLI than SNMP, right? That sort of thing. And then you just load up the system with a bunch of credentials, both CLI and SNMP, give it a priority and how you want us to try these. We do support SNMP v3. And then once we find credentials that work, we'll remember those and continue to use them until they don't work anymore, and then we'll retry. So it's pretty easy to set that up. We also keep a database of CLI vendor defaults. Like this is the default that comes with the Cisco or the Juniper, that sort of thing. And if we discover that those are in use on a network device, we'll raise an issue. That was one of the things that killed Equifax a couple weeks ago, right? They had an admin username password on a system. It wasn't a network device, but similar type of a problem. So once you set that up and discovery runs, then we are going to keep an inventory of all of your equipment. Okay. This is, I have a few devices I'm going to use in the lab, but this is where we're keeping all the IP addresses, the names. I'll give you, I'll show you a second, a little bit, some of the data that we include. But in this list is where you're seeing the model, the operating system, that sort of thing. You can also see here, because I do have the advisor here for these particular devices, I have my the date that this device went end of sale. These are old devices. That's what our lab consists of. But good examples here. When it went end of support and what its EOX status is. So all those devices are end of support. But if they weren't, it could be like that it has been announced that it's an end of sale, that sort of thing. But this is right in your UI all the time, just to give you an idea what that looks like. But you have control over what columns. You have control over what fields you want to see here, right? And so there's a ton of them, and you can create your own fields in here as well for what you want to see. And then if I drill into a particular device, just to give you an idea of some of the data that we're collecting, I don't have time to go through all these, but in one view, you're seeing all the issues that have been reported recently, all the changes, the compliance violations, performance, environmental. What I wanted to focus on was, for instance, I could go to interfaces. This is a device viewer. You can also see some of the information across the top, which is valuable: uptime, model, OS, that sort of thing. If I go into interfaces, you can see we're keeping a database object for every interface or port on this switch router as well. I can drill into the interface and then get a ton of other data, right? The neighbors which attach to it. We use CDP, LLDP, routing tables, that sort of thing. Performance, right? Rates, percents, counts, on CPU, on interface, that sort of thing. But so we're drilling into getting good data right on the individual interfaces. Got all the routing tables, okay? In config management, these are all the configurations that have been collected, right? And you can go to any one of these and take a view. You can test it against a policy. You could create it into a template. This is probably looks familiar to you if you've ever done a show run on a iOS device. Okay. Under settings and status, there's a lot of logs. One thing I'm going to show you a bit later is that we have an SSH proxy. So this will show you, for instance, the last time, or actually every time somebody logged into that device, what they typed. So I was in this device recently, and I changed the SNMP server community to public, and there's a complete record of that right here. A snapshot was taken afterwards, but even so, I could keep a track of every command that was ever typed on every device. All right. Also in here, in this accordion, all of the interfaces on the entire network can be listed in one view. You can see some of the fields here, what you would expect: admin state, up, down, opera state, trunk status, speed, duplex, that sort of thing. We're also categorizing by unused and up, unused down, which is nice. Unused up means it's admin up and it's not being used. Right, unused down is that it is admin down. We're categorizing all the operating systems on the network. So there's, for instance, 20 devices that are running iOS 12.4, 25B. If I want to see what 20, I can click that, and I'm going to get that view. So every OS, right? Got a lot of Cisco in here. Looks like we have some F5, and then all the models categorized. Just give you a little sample, some of the data here. Most of my labs is 3620s, but I've got a few. I got 5 ASA firewalls, and here they are, right? So that's kind of what the inventory looks like. But we also will summarize. So we're going to pull apart all the objects that we're collecting around all these network devices and group them here. So that, for instance, if you want to see what all the subnets on the network are, this, for instance, is the data that gets sent up to our IPAM system. Say, hey, well, if the IPAM administrators need to know that these subnets are on the network, for instance, right? All the VLANs, right? You can click on a VLAN, it'll show you all the devices that are using it. HSRP groups, ports. We have Nmap scanning turned on, so I'm seeing all the occurrences, for instance, of devices that are using Telnet. There's 46 that have Telnet turned on. So if you had a policy in place saying, hey, no Telnet, you could write a rule to do it, but this is a quick way to say, I've got all these that are using Telnet, right? Or maybe you had a rule that HTTP shouldn't be getting used, right? These 20 devices have HTTP on. Network views, categorized VRFs, that sort of thing. We do have a topology viewer, as I mentioned. Again, it shows by default L2 hops. There's a few different tools that we make available to you. I have time to I can show you one. For instance, this device right here, I could say, all right, let's do L2 N hops and show me all the devices that are 2 hops away from an L2 standpoint, meaning almost like that are physically connected. So from branch 2 device, these are all the devices that are 2 hops away. And I can do something similar where I'm doing L3 hops. And you can choose which routing protocol you want us to base this on. All right, I'm going to use all. It'll show you all the ones that are 2 hops away from an L3 standpoint. All right. I could also do most likely path. So where's my branch 2? Let's see my device in there. Right. I guess I won't do that example. We'll come back with that if I have time. The discovery area is basically giving you the status of discovery for all of our end hosts, or I'm sorry, all of the network devices. So we may know that something exists because we saw it in an ARP table, right? But we may not have reached it with SNMP yet. So this is that's giving you the full status of discoveries that it might help you troubleshoot. Here's the switch port management area. This is where, for instance, we're giving you a summary of these are all the switches. Across the top is telling you your total ports, free, percent free, available free for 14 days, right? Or more days. You can control that number. And then you're seeing all the things you would typically see for a specific switch. The used total ports, used trunks, used access ports, free ports, right? And you can drill in to see those 10 that are free %, right? I can also do this on interface. So these are all the switch ports again, right? With all the data you'd expect to see. You have control here by just clicking to set the admin status, edit description, or select a VLAN right from here without having to create a template or anything at all. And then you also have end hosts. I don't have a lot in my lab, but this is where you would see all of your attached end hosts. You could search for MAC address or IP address, that sort of thing. All right. If I move over to the config management area, a few things I'll point out. One is that we do have the full-blown archive of all of your configurations. And here's where you would do like a side-by-side comparison. So like if I wanted to compare the current running with an archive running, I can compare that. You can see that SNMP server community public read only was removed. That was the change. But here you can see the color-coded changes. You can compare any two configs. You can compare even against a second device if you want, right? The search is very nice, mainly because you can run a job right out of the search. So once you find something, it's a frequent use case. Once you find something, you want to run something against it. And you can save off all of your searches. So there's a common search, like here's one that I use for the demo a lot, where I'm searching for, and this is a regex search, SNMP server community .star, which is basically a wildcard read only. Okay, so I can say, all right, well, let's go ahead and run that search. This particular search is set up to look at current running configurations. And then it's pulling them all back. I can adjust to see what fields I want to see here. Right, let's say I think it's useful to look at the field that was matched, right? And then I can come here and say, all right, what was that field that matched SNMP? Because I wanted to see what's set out there. And so maybe I'm like, oh, well, my rule is that they should all be Infoblox. Looks like I have a couple of ones that shouldn't be here, like Don, right? Say, hey, which one of these have Don in them, right? Oh, it's these 4. Right, they have Don in them, and say, all right, well, I need to remove those because they shouldn't be here. Right from this point, I could say, all right, well, let's select all those. Let's execute a command. And then right from here, on those devices, I'm going to do a config T, right? I'm going to do an SNMP. I'm going to do a no SNMP server info, no, community. Done only, right? And exit. And I could run that. I'm not going to run it now, but right here, run now, and those are going to get cleared out. So you can just see that you can run actions right out of the config search, which is nice. I mentioned there was a wide variety of things that you could push out. There are templates, right? Templates are really just like a text file. I won't linger here too long. A super simple example might be this, where all this is doing is sending that line out. So you could put that line in a template. You could push that out to 100 devices and they'd all get that line. But a template can also be a lot more complicated than that. It could be, it could represent even like the full configuration of a device, like to be involved in like maybe a bare metal provisioning or a day one provisioning. One thing that's interesting about this template is it has variables. So those will be queried for at job runtime, and then it'll substitute those values into the template here. So if I was to run this, it would say it's querying for those values here to drop them into the template, right? There's also scripts. And so the scripts are basically looking a little bit more like the commands that you might send out, right? One nice thing about the scripts is that you can put data in there for more than one vendor, right? Say, I don't know, I'll take a guess that this one has something interesting in it. Add routes multi-vendor. Okay, yeah. So basically, that's the command for Cisco. That's the command for H3C, for Extreme, and Terasys, right? So this one script could be applied to a group of devices that consists of all these, and under the covers, we're going to abstract it and use the right commands when we push that out. Right? And then, of course, there's Perl and Python. So the sky's the limit on what you want to do. Generally, we recommend doing CCS and only going with Perl or Python if you're really doing something a little bit more sophisticated, where you're going to call into our API, pull data before you interact with the device, or interact with the device and then call into our API to make updates, that sort of thing. Okay, good. So what else I want to point out here? I'll come back to list. Let's go to the policy. So there's a few things that I have an example here. So my lab devices that I usually demo with have three different policies assigned to them right now. It's these right here, and I have an operational set of rules for operational rules like syslog settings, NTP server settings, SNMP, that sort of thing. It has security rules, right? And then this is a rule set, or I'm sorry, a policy that was put here by the advisor product, right? So it's basically as it picks up CVEs or P-certs from vendors like Cisco, right? It found some for this set of devices, right? And two of these devices have one against them right now, right? So that's kind of an example of the device telling you, of the system telling you right off the bat that you're running a vulnerable operating system. And that came up automatically, right? If I go over to the policy design center for my policies, I'll show you what these are. The ones we're focusing on are operations policies, right, and security policies. So my operations policies are for my system contact, my syslog, SNMP location, and the users that are allowed to be there for this demo. And for my security policies, I have quite a bit. It's a console timeouts that enable secret is on, that HTTP is disabled. I'm not using any default SNMP community names as an example. If I go into the rules, so you get a better look at these. This is where I wanted to show you the rule editor, which is kind of a nice capability. You can check absolutely anything you want. We have 3 different editors that you can use. If I start with a simple example like this one, right? If for instance, you want to make sure that this one line is in a config, right? You don't want to have a complicated editor that has you set that up, right? In this case, we're using a simple rule editor. We have simple, rule logic, and XML. CDP is about to be obsoleted. But this is an example of a simple rule, very simple, this line, and it says the config file must contain that line. So once this rule goes into a policy, it's assigned to a device. Every time we snapshot the device, if that line's not there, then we'll raise an issue, right? Another example that's slightly different. Again, this is a simple rule, but in this case, we're saying make sure that this line is not there. So this is the rule that's making sure HTTP is not enabled. Make sure that it doesn't have that line in it. It may not contain. We take it up a notch. I wanted to show you, what was it, community strings? Yeah, so here now we're going to rule logic. Right, so here's where you can do a logical expression of a bunch of simple rules. So in this case, it's saying if one, meaning if we find anything that begins with SNMP server, then make sure that the line does not contain SNMP server community public or private. So this is basically the rule that's ensuring that that you don't have default settings on your SNMP community names. Oh, and I wanted to point out something too on this exec timeout, because a lot of times you say, oh, sometimes these things have blocks, they have areas that are indented. How do I know where I am? This is an example of a simple rule where we're making sure that an exec timeout is set on all the VTY interfaces. And I know this may look a little complicated, but once you know a few things, not very much, but just a few things about regular expressions, this is really easy to build. So this is basically beginning with line VTY, number. That's a \D is a number, \N is a line feed, \s is a space. This one line is ensuring that a timeout is set on all the VTY blocks, right? Another example, and this is where I'll take you to the XML Rule Builder, where the sky's the limit, and which is the topic of our tab this month, is this is an example of a simple rule to make sure that those 4 NTP servers, and only those 4, just saying make sure nothing that's not one of those lines is in the config. This is an NTP server example. Here's one that's using rule logic, where now it's looking at, the rule has device view in it, so we can check actual device attributes when we're doing the rule. This is 1 and 2, or 3 and 4, and 5. So 1 and 2 is if it's in network view A, these should be the NTP servers. If it's in network view B, these should be the NTP servers. But every single device should have nothing but those 4 and nothing more. And then the XML Rule Editor, this is almost like a full-blown programming language. You can check anything you want. Obviously, we're not going to get into the details of this. This is the subject of our tutorial this month at the tab. But notice I'm referencing a list called NTP servers, right? These lists, you may have seen this over here, can be referenced in rules and in scripts. So basically what that rule is doing is it looks up this list, which is like a CSV file. It's like a simple database. And does a lookup up device A, that device is in, so that NTP server value should be there. This device network view A, it should be that NTP server. And so now if you want to change the behavior of your rule, you really just have to change the list. You don't have to go in and change the actual rule or the script itself. All right. What I wanted to do real quick is just kind of show you an example of a couple things. First, I mentioned that there's a SSH proxy that you're seeing here on the screen, right? So I can SSH into my NetMRI appliance, right? And this is asking me for the same user interface that, the same password that I would use if I was logging at the UI. Right, and that can be authenticated out in a wide variety of ways: Active Directory, TACX, Radius, and then you're presented with a simple command line interface. Right, I'm just checking for all the devices that begin with that. There's that one, and then if I want to, I can connect directly to 72, 16, 10, 2, right? And that connection can have a cut through. If you can put those command lines on your terminal emulator of choice, you don't have to use SSH. You can use PuTTY, you can use Secure CRT. You can do a cut through directly to that device, which virtually makes it look like you're SSHing directly to the device. So if you've got engineers that know and love that CLI and want to keep using it, they can use this. So for this particular device, I'm going to deliberately break a rule, right? I'm going to, because you recall one of those rules was to make sure that that I'm not using public or private for my community names, right? So I'm going to do that to this one, right? Save it out, right? Not going to bother with the write mem for now. And for this particular device, which is right here, we would detect that change occurred, and we would force a backup. Now, for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and force the backup right now, so it happens a little bit more quickly, right? And that configuration is being backed up right now. And I'm going to go check that in a minute. But while we're waiting, I did want to show you really quickly how we set up auto remediation, because I do have a triggered job here, for instance, that's called PCI DTS disable HTTP service. And so what this triggered job is doing is it's saying, hey, when this rule is broken, right, okay, then I want you to run this script, okay? And that's all it is, that all you have to do when you're setting up a triggered job, in this case, to do the auto remediation, right? So if we were to break that down over in my rule, right? This was my HTTP rule. We saw that earlier. Said, hey, make sure that's not there. And then basically, based on that triggered job, it's going to run a script that is going to make sure that it's gone, which is disable HTTP service. That was the one that was called out in the trigger job. Looks like that. It's going to be taken out. Right. So just wanted to point that out, that that's the way you do an auto remediation. Now our config's probably backed up by now. So if I went to see my SNMP community strings here, a rule that says it should be public or private. Let's go test this rule now against that device that I backed up, and it should fail. And it did, right? It failed. Now in the rule, I can also say, well, if you want to fix this, you could just run that script right there. So this is a manual change. So if I go run that script, then it would correct that particular device. All right, good. All right, so just a couple little things to wrap it up. I mentioned that we had a ton of out-of-the-box issues that we check. You can take a look at those. This is kind of a nice tip because I don't think it's in the regular documentation. If you go to our help screen to additional documentation, you can see the comprehensive issues list. And these are all the issues that we are checking out of the box. Okay. But again, you can suppress these if you don't care, or you can build your own custom issues and even decide how you want to have them affect your overall health score, right? And those custom issues can do some pretty interesting things. I mean, you basically could write a simple CCS script, checks for something. If it's there, raise an issue. So you have total control over what it is. And these can even reference lists if you want. You have control over what the issue is going to look like when it appears in an email or a syslog or a trap, that sort of thing. And then the only part left here that I was going to cover was the reports. Yeah, there's a ton of anything that doesn't have a wrench and a hammer comes out of the box. You can see I have a lot of ones that have been custom built here. A lot of different galleries, but for example, one that it gets commonly used, like this one here, ports not used in the past 30 days. Just to give you an idea of what it looks like to custom build a rule, which is not that difficult, is you're giving it a title, and then you have access to the data type. So this is where we're giving you, basically you're getting a view into the API here. The API is totally documented by going to the appliance, or just going to API, right? And it's all documented online here on the appliance. You're telling it which gallery category you want it to go in. There's 5 galleries. And then here's where you're building the criteria. So any interface where the operational status is down, right? But the last oper change date was basically farther away than 30 days ago, right? When all those conditions are met, I want you to pull that device. And when you pull it, I want you to grab this data. You have access to everything in the database just for the report, what I want to see. What is the oper status, admin status, that sort of thing, right? And then you can sort the columns, and then you're good to go, right? So if I could run that report, I'll just run it across everything, run it. Actually, I think I had this, not sure how long it'll run. You can run it in the background and come back later in the report scheduler. All right. I'll come back to that. And then the last thing I wanted to point out, actually, I'm kind of pushing because I'm right at time, is these notifications. I've been talking all day about, or the whole hour, about sending notifications out for items, right? And this is where you would set these up. So any issue, any change, any job, any alert, all the issues can be selected. You can search. You can decide if you're going to email them out. SNMP trap, syslog. It's very easy to set up a notification for stuff like that. All right, good. So I'm at the hour. Let me stop. And if you're going to, if you need to leave, I just want to say thanks for attending. Again, look out for future invitations. And if you even want to make a request on a specific topic to cover in the future, we'd be glad to consider that. And again, This is recorded. You'll get a link to the recording in case you missed something. And if your question in chat hasn't been answered yet, we will, that'll be included in the email also. Good. So if you have to go, fine. What I'm going to do now, though, is stop the recording, and I'll open up the lines in case anybody just wants to ask me a question. So again, thanks for attending.